So PeerTalk is a charity that supports people who struggle with mental health, emotional well-being, and we're a national charity, although we pretty much have our roots in Settle, so that's why we're here. Come on in. One of the reasons why we're having this series of 3 talks is just to sort of raise the profile of PeerTalk in Settle, for one thing. We're looking for volunteers to help us out. And we thought what we would do to do that would be to have these 3 talks, PeerTalk talks, on topics which are very current and the impact of which often these themes do impact on people's mental health and well-being, which is why we're considering them. Last week we had a thorough introduction to the development of mental health services. It got a bit horrific. We had a lecture on some of the methods that were previously used in psychiatry, which included putting spikes through people's eyeballs into their brain. I got a bit gory at that time, but we got through that bit into some more positive ways of improving our own well-being. This week, we're going to be thinking about the Black Lives Matter movement and how that impacts on community life and how it impacts on people who are affected by it. And so we invited the Reverend Dr. Inderjit Bhogal to come. Well, he actually offered to come and speak, which I put a request out, and Inderjit offered himself to come and speak. So between 1981 to 1985, I was employed by the Methodist Church, and I was working overseas in Asia, in Nepal, and I was there for 3 years or more, just a bit longer than 3 years. And when I came back from my Asian experience, I said to the Methodist Church, is there some way of being able to capture that Asian experience and introduce it into my life in the UK? I don't know whether you were the only Asian Methodist at the time, but so they sent me to spend a week, or certainly a few days with Inderjit, and we've tracked each other since then, which is, so I'm really pleased that Inderjit's here this evening. Last week, Dr. Guy Sidley said, how long have I got? And I said 45 minutes, and he said, oh, that's not very long, and he went on for an hour and a quarter. With questions. This week I asked Inderjit how long he was going to speak for. Inderjit's going to speak for half an hour, without any aid of any slides, and then he's happy to take questions and comments on anything that anybody might have to say. So I would like you to show your appreciation, all the way from Sheffield this evening. I'd like to show your appreciation for it, make sure how welcome Inderjit is amongst us. Thank you.
Thank you, and I greet you like this, which is an Indian way of greeting. It's a way of saying, I honour you and that of God in you, with the deepest respect that I can muster within myself. So I prefer that to the elbow or the ankle kind of greeting, and it predates COVID-19. It's not as a result of COVID-19, but that's how I would greet people in any case. I honour you. I volunteered to come along, Stephen, because of you, because we've known each other a long time, and I'm always happy to support you and your work. And I'm a supporter of the work you do with PeerTalk, and I consider it as a really important initiative that must be supported by the Methodist Church, and I'm glad there is some support, at least from the Methodist Church. And if that wasn't the case, I'd be alarmed. So I'm glad there is some support. I greet you all in the name of Christ and wish upon you the peace and the blessings of God. I could speak till the cows come home, but I'll try to restrict myself to 30 minutes, and then we can... My purpose is to provoke a discussion. I'll say some provocative things, and it's really to make you think, and rather to provide answers. I want to begin really by saying thank you to the people of the Methodist Church here in Settle, who do all that you can to keep people connected. This is really important. It's a very important part of mental health and caring for each other and being with each other. And in these awful times of this wretched coronavirus, I would say it is the duty of churches to do all we can to keep people connected. And there's only one number Jesus ever mentioned, and that's 2 or 3. And he said, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I'm there in the midst of them. So it's not about having large numbers, but about making sure that people have small and special friendships which keep them connected and give them hope. And that's what it is to be human, to be with each other. And I respect you enormously for turning out on this not brilliant night to come and share in this important conversation. So the theme is Black History Month, and some of you may be wondering where on earth this idea of Black History Month is from. But having been challenged most of this summer, since the 25th of May, do you remember George Floyd and his horrific murder, and Black Lives Matter? But that campaign particularly has created a bit more of an awareness of blackness, black lives, and Black History Month. We all know that white lives matter, and that's why it's important also to insist that black lives matter. All people are made in the image of God, whatever the colour of your skin. Every person is a child of God, and no one should be treated as anything less than that. History is complex, and there are always different memories of events, and therefore it's important for all sides in history to be heard. And Black History Month really is a call to ensure that black history does not remain hidden, that black people's memories and understanding of history is acknowledged too. And it is an annual call to us to ensure that the way black people have been treated, for example in transatlantic slave trade, and more recently in the Windrush scandal, is acknowledged and not submerged in history. One of the things about mental health, I don't know if it was mentioned last year, is the way people used to get sent into asylum. Fortunately, nobody gets sent into asylum these days, and that's a good thing. But people who were considered to be not safe to be out in community were locked up in asylums, and sometimes it troubles me the way people with mental health conditions and situations are treated by being restrained and so on, as if they were going to be harmful. That continues to this day. But we don't have people who are sent to asylum. However, we have asylum seekers. Who seeks to go into asylum? Nobody. It's a terrible terminology, and I don't like to call anybody an asylum seeker, because nobody is unfit if you're a refugee and not safe to be in community. I therefore have developed my own work, which is called City of Sanctuary. City of Sanctuary is to say that people who are hurting want sanctuary. We all want to be safe, and I prefer to talk about people seeking sanctuary and for people to be given sanctuary rather than asylum. So Black History Month falls in October and was established 100 years ago exactly in 1920 and began as what was called Negro History Week. And in this country this year, you will have seen pictures of post boxes being painted black as a way of celebrating Black History Month in London and Glasgow, Cardiff and Belfast, featuring prominent black Britons like the Jamaican-born Mary Seacole in Cardiff, the footballer Walter Tull in Glasgow, and the comedian Lenny Henry in Belfast. My real claim to fame is that I went to school with Lenny Henry. We went to school in Dudley at the same time, and both of us left school without any qualifications because our teachers didn't think we were up to any good, but we both made our way in life and made some contribution to British life. A significant contribution, a Methodist contribution to the theme of colour has been Racial Justice Sunday, which was established in 1995. So amongst other things, we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of Racial Justice Sunday. Racial Justice Sunday is to encourage churches in worship and prayer to mark our commitment to work for racial justice. Black History Month has three features. It highlights the colour black, the theme of history, and that it's about a month and not a day and not a transient thought, but something that stays with us. Maybe the most controversial part of Black Lives Matter and Black History Month is the colour black. Some argue, why black? Why do we have to have a Black History Month? Why do we have to have Black Lives Matter? White Lives Matter too. Why Black History Month? Where is it going to stop? Are we going to have something about all the colours? Well, there's green. So we can have a green month. No, why not? That's happening. Colours of the rainbow. We can think about things we can work on. But there appears to be a difficulty in holding up the colour black positively. And so, in my contribution, I want to highlight the role of theology, particularly in human identity, and I want to question and reject the idea that white is the colour of purity and black is the colour of profanity. That white is the ideal colour, that black is bleakness, white is good, black is bad, white represents law, black represents criminality. I could say to you, if you could have a bit of discussion, just think about the way you use the term black in everyday conversation. What's the way you use that term most? And we could look at that and what that says about the colour black. The association of white with good and clean and privilege, and black with bad and dirty and subjugation, is deep set in many ways. Washing powder? No. Adverts. They promote the value of the product by showing how white and spotless clothes are after a wash in whatever it is, Daz or what have you. But we've never shown, are we, how clean and spotless black clothes are after you've had a wash in whatever the washing powder is. In movies, good and main characters are usually fair and white, bad and secondary characters are black or dark, and that goes for Bollywood as much as for Hollywood. In Asian countries, one of the biggest sellers is the cream or product to make the skin fair and beautiful, and this is endorsed by big-name actors and actresses. In the Western world, on the other hand, white people spend millions of pounds on skin tanning creams and products, and that is endorsed by big-name actors and actresses. Apparently, the amount of money people spend on making themselves look more beautiful, and I think the big issue for mental health kind of discussions, the amount of money spent on making yourself look better is more than the whole of the car economy across the world. I'm from Sikh background, and my family are all Punjabi, and I can tell you that every Punjabi wedding is preceded by a traditional ceremony a couple of days before the marriage ceremony, where the bride is, even if only symbolically, wiped with a turmeric-based paste. Turmeric is good for everything now, isn't it? The idea is to cleanse dirt and impurities and to make the skin fair. So let's rub the skin with this thing to make the bride look more beautiful. Punjabi art portrays holy people with a light skin colour. And there's an ongoing discussion in the Sikh community about the acceptable colours of holiness, and much of the discussion in Sikhs is driven by politics and theology. Sikhs and people of Asian background generally have to conduct this discussion in the light of issues around colour and caste and creed and class, and in all these things, the colour black has negative associations and is compounded by the unenlightened colonial understandings of colour. And I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. In so many ways, in Asian life, the darker the skin colour, the lower you are considered to be in the pecking order. Power and privilege is colour-based. The lighter you are, the higher your position. The darker you are, the lower your position. And this is perpetuated in Indian movies. There's a film, a recent film called Fashion, where the worst position for an Asian woman is to find that she wakes up besides a black man. So, alright, what I'm saying to you, by doing this as a kind of a starter, is to say, it isn't just an issue for white people. Asian people think like this too. The idea that white is good and black is bad is widespread, and it needs to be challenged in every community. I utterly reject this colour-based prejudice and discrimination, and it is essential that theology in all faiths and in interfaith dialogue addresses colour-based discrimination, and especially the association of blackness or darkness with badness and whiteness with holiness. As we go to Christmas, and if you sing still, or at least look at carols, just look at how the colour black is portrayed and how the colour white is portrayed in hymns. I believe that if we can begin to address the issues around identity, black and white, it will contribute to health and healthy and healing relationships and good mental health. Black Lives Matter includes the challenge that theology cannot remain silent while black and dark-skinned people suffer the denial of their humanity and life. And so we need to really look at this and examine it. What is termed racism, and I don't like the term racism, and we can talk about that a little bit more. I believe all human beings are one race, and there's only one race. And if there's only one race, what's racism? It's a real contradiction. But what is termed racism is the exercise of prejudice plus power. We all are prejudiced. We all have our prejudices. We all have our likes and dislikes. But what is called racism is where prejudice comes together with power and is the exercise of prejudice and power, and where it affects black people in negative ways. Black people live in a world in which blackness is identified with criminality. And if that's the world in which you live, it begins to cut into you and it begins to affect your identity. And and creates real issues for black people. And that's why this is so important. So I want to move to do two things now. One is to just give you a very brief look at the way colour is used in the Bible, and then I want to go to some social sciences to look at how colour has come to define human identity. So from a Sikh and Christian perspective, as I've said to you, white is upheld as the colour of holiness, and black is the colour of sin. Holy things, such as sacraments and scriptures, are held and wrapped in white cloths. However, it's not as straightforward as this, or as black and white as that, if I might put it like that. There are complexities and contradictions. I have seen many people, white people, on holidays who delight in their skin colour being darker than mine. They lie like, whilst motionless creatures, having put some cream on them to become darker, while I sit under a tree and look at them there. That's amazing. So it's complicated. But faith-based practice does not always reflect what Scripture actually teaches. Let me illustrate this by considering words that would be familiar to Bible readers. So I'm not going to assume everybody here is a Bible reader, but address my comments first to people who will be familiar with the Bible. There's a verse in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 18, and you might like to have a look at it yourself later. But the verse reads, "Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they shall be as wool." Now these words are traditionally taken to mean, though your sins are dirty, they're going to be made clean, as white as snow. I want to offer you an interpretation that turns this on its head. It is always illuminating to look at the context in which particular words are written in Scripture. And Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, is divided into three sections. There's kind of a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the beginning bit deals with prophecies, which are saying to the children of Israel, if you continue to behave badly, bad things are going to happen to you. You're going to go into exile. And then they go into exile in Babylon. And the second bit is a reflection of being in exile. And the third bit is a kind of post-exile reflection when they're back in Israel. So the first bit is really where the prophet is saying, if you continue to misbehave, you're going to be punished, and your punishment will be exile. So the words have to mean things are going to get worse. So right at the beginning, in chapter 1, in verse 18, we read, "Though your sins are as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow." What that actually means is, you haven't seen anything yet. Though your sins are as scarlet, things are going to get worse. They will be as white as snow. And in this context, the words of Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 18 actually mean that things are going to get worse. White as snow does not mean better and good and clean. It means quite the opposite. Now let me illustrate that by referring to a particular story in the Bible, and you'll find it in Numbers chapter 12. Numbers chapter 12 is where Aaron and Miriam are challenging the leadership of the great man Moses. And when you want to challenge the leadership of a great leader, you pick on their weakest spot. So what did they think was their weakest spot? Well, he married a black woman. Apparently Moses had two wives. One was a Midianite and one was a Cushite. The Midianite is not mentioned because she will have looked a bit like him, but the Cushite woman is mentioned. In chapter 12, in Numbers chapter 12, Aaron and Miriam are being utterly critical of Moses and saying, he's married a Cushite woman. Why is that such an important thing? All we know about this woman is that she's a Cushite woman. She didn't get to speak at all in the text. And so what do we know? Cush is the southernmost territory mentioned in the Bible. It is the Upper Nile, south of Egypt. It's where Ethiopia would be in the modern world, although that's not the term which is used here. Cush. It can be reasonably assumed that the Cushite woman that Moses has married is of black African appearance. Aaron and Miriam object to Moses being married to a black woman, and they see this as the greatest weakness of Moses' leadership to exploit. So what's the result? What happens as a result of their criticism? What happens is that God hears this going on and actually appears in the midst of them and says to Aaron and Miriam and to Moses, right, you three out there in the tent of the meeting, I want a word. And so they meet with God, and God addresses Aaron and Miriam and challenges them for criticizing Moses, the great man, in this way. Who are you that you should use such racist slurs to challenge Moses? And so then it says, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Aaron and Miriam, and there are consequences. So what are the consequences of this kind of racism? Number one, God departs, leaves them. Number two, Miriam becomes, it says, leprous, as white as snow. And there are lessons in this passage for us to learn about God, what matters to God, and about people and their prejudices, and about prayer and progress. Moses prays for Miriam to be healed, and there is no movement that is possible in that community while this kind of racist behavior is going on. That's all contained in one chapter in the Bible, in Numbers chapter 12. It's only about 12 verses, but you have a read of that and you get a good insight. But what I want to say to you is that from here on, because it's the first place where the colour white appears in the Bible, from here on we have to read it in this light. It is a negative colour in the Bible. White as snow is a reference to impurity. That your sins are as scarlet, and they shall become as white as snow, means that things are going to get worse. Miriam being as white as snow does not mean that her appearance was angelic, but quite the opposite. Now when theologians like me point this out, what is really happening is that people are being asked to examine how we use colour in our language and liturgy and hymnody, and to look at how colour is used in church life. Just for example, when communion is conducted at this table and bread and wine are placed there, normally, and there is an instruction in the service book that is used in this building which says the minister covers the elements with a white cloth. That's what it says. What would happen if you covered it in a black cloth? No. That's the kind of thing I'm really looking at, because the colour white has been associated with holiness and the colour black with unholiness. So my friends, all kinds of questions begin to emerge about church life and for theology and for ethics and morality when you examine the way colour is applied and used. And quite often, if you go into churches which have stained glass windows and where Jesus is portrayed, you will find that invariably, although Jesus came from the Middle East and probably had the appearance like me, he is portrayed as a white man with blonde hair and blue eyes. And what is being said here about the acceptable colour and image of humanity in that kind of a portrayal. Well, let's put theology on one side and move to social sciences as I move towards the conclusion. I think one of the current issues that the pandemic has clarified for me is that discrimination that is based on skin colour is a very deep reality. Black people live in a world in which blackness is negatively identified with criminality and profanity. In such conditions, there is a negative impact on the mental health of black people and black people with darker skin colours. This is seen, for example, in the disproportionate numbers of black people who end up in prisons and in mental health centres. And we've all become aware that black people are the ones who, again, are disproportionately, apparently affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And George Floyd's murder has named the endemic inequalities faced by black and minority ethnic communities daily in health and housing, education and employment as racism. That's what racism looks like. That's how it impacts on black people. The COVID-19 pandemic has uncovered the deep sickness of hatred and the resulting inequalities of racism and the harm that it does. And we can talk about that a little bit more if you wish to. But for me, tackling racism at its worst begins with tackling hatred, which is deeply rooted in concepts of colour and racial differences, and in which religious belief is so often co-opted to sanction hatred and negativity. I delight in human diversity. Human DNA shows an incredible mixing and intermingling among human beings throughout history. Consequently, there is an incredible variety in skin colours and a deep visual beauty in them all. The skin colour, which is referred to as white, is incredibly variable. And so is the skin colour of people of Asian or African or Aboriginal people of any one nation. I don't know if you remember Stephen Biko from apartheid eras, who raised the whole idea of black consciousness with people during the apartheid times. And when he was in court for actually giving a positive image to blackness, he was arrested. In the end, he was killed in prison. But when he was in court, one of the judges said to him, "Stephen, you're not really black, are you, yourself?" He's a black South African. And Stephen Biko said to him, "Well, when you have your coffee without milk, you call it black." So there are variables in the way you understand the term black and white. But we reduce the variables to the simplicities of black and white. You're black, you're white. And this remarkable diversity of people who are rooted in the global south is reduced to what is now being called BAME, black and minority ethnic people. And calling some people BAME is a bit like labeling all the incredible variety of Asian cuisine as curry, which is as ludicrous as calling all British food as gravy. There's nothing that I, in my language, in my cuisine, that I call curry. But all Indian food in English is called curry. So I can tell you, no Asians eat curry. We eat lots of other food which is called curry. And we need to just look at how we use language. Genetically, all people in the world are about 12th and 13th cousins of each other. We're all that closely related to each other. This scientific assertion means that there is no basis to the argument that there are different races, with one group superior to another. Human beings are not people of different races. So we should stop using terms like multiracial and mixed race because we are one race. Of course, we all carry the capacity for selfishness, and we all have our biases and prejudices, as I've said. But with our immense differences, we are one race, the human race, incredibly alike and all made in the image of God. Life is precious to us all. We all require breath and blood in our bodies. And whoever you are, your well-being will be checked against the same rate of heartbeat and pulse. How did skin colour come to be so embedded in discrimination? Where did that come from? Of significance for our reflections is the fact, to quote a scholar in genetics, the emergence of scientific approach to human taxonomy coincided with the growth of European empires. Characterization of different populations before the expansion of Europeans around the globe was more likely to be based on religion or language than skin colour. But with the birth and growth of the era of scientific revolution, pigmentation became essential to the character of human beings. Skin colour came to be used to exercise power and prejudice to other human beings of a different and particularly darker skin tone, and to sanction the subjugation and the enslavement of some people. And this development was integral to the development of the transatlantic slave trade 400 years ago and the history of racism since then. It is far easier to sell the case for occupation and enslavement if you can be persuaded that the indigenous people are different, they have different origins, and they are qualitatively inferior to colonists. And that, in the time of the so-called Enlightenment, was the thinking that was beginning to be developed in order to subjugate black people. Scholars in the so-called Enlightenment period of history, the period of empire building and colonial expansion, helped to formulate the idea of fixed differences in human beings, primarily based on skin colour, linking skin colour to character and ranking human beings. Those with lighter skins were said to be superior to those with darker skins, and we continue to live with that. Here lie the roots of the supremacy of the colour white and the idea of different races based on skin colour. Contemporary science has rejected these classifications, though they persist in many people's mindsets, views, and opinions. Where we are now is that sciences refuse to show linear, discrete characterization of human beings. Rather, it reveals a complex human history and life. Complexity which increases with the movement, the meandering, and the migration of people across the globe from about 70,000 years ago. The baseline of the most recent scientific human genetics is that all human beings share all of their DNA, and of all the attempts over the centuries to place human beings in distinct races, none of those approaches succeeds, and none of them is acceptable. Genetics refuses to comply with these artificial and superficial categories. So while theology insists that we are all made in the image of God, it is an utter sacrilege that religion has been used and co-opted to bring in the idea that there are those people who are clean and there are those people who are dirty. There is such a thing as holiness and such a thing as profanity into the mix, and we have to bring all these things together when we're looking at human behavior and what requires to happen now. What all this does is that it suggests that people who are like us are clean, and those who are not like us are dirty. You just look at how people react to those who are different, who come from other countries, and who bring their diseases and their dirt with them. And that's how ethics so often seems to go. Whiteness is seen as good and pure, blackness is seen negatively, and I've said, I just utterly reject this reasoning, and science certainly does, and so does theology in my view, although it is far more complex than that. White has come to be associated with power and privilege and goodness, black with subjugation, denial and badness. This is why it is important for us to give some attention to this. Why it is important to stand by Black Lives Matter, and why it is important to have a discussion like this on during Black History Month. Racism is an obscenity. It is a negation of our humanity. It is a painful form of violence which is dehumanizing and degrading, and we all have to do all we can to stand together, all of us, with all our different skin variables, to stop and to resist racism. This is as important in Settle as it is in Sheffield, where I live. And I'm asking you to examine your own attitudes and your own behavior, and to stop stereotyping people on the basis of skin color, and when people do that, to challenge them with some of the kind of thinking that I've presented to you. Promote respectful relationships and be human, call others to their humanity, and always challenge hatred. And you are challenging hatred when you challenge inhumanity. So let me now close. I want to close by giving you 7 incredibly important words from Scripture by which to live. For me, this is the summary of religion, all religion. This is the summary of ethics. It's all summed up in 7 words. What are they? Love God. Love your neighbour as yourself. I read that in reverse order. Love yourself. That's the number one thing. You're number one. It is not a selfish thing to say that. This is important for white people. This is important for black people. It is important for women and for men. Love yourself. You remember when we used to travel by plane, and when you got on the plane, the first instruction was, in case of emergency, a mask will drop down. Put your own mask on first. First time I heard that, I thought, I'm not too sure about that. I think I want to jump out of my seat and help somebody else. But actually, then I realized, if I don't have my mask on, I'm not going to be able to help anyone else. That's why we're all wearing masks, or required to mask now to wear masks. So it's about loving yourself first. That's the number one thing. If you can love yourself, you can more easily and more effectively love your neighbour as yourself. And if you can love your neighbour as yourself, well, you're very close to what it means to love God. Thank you, and bless you.
Thank you.
Yeah, yes. We've got a few minutes, I think.
I've got loads.
Yeah.
So, I esteem Colin, yes, clearly, everything you said, absolutely. I think there's not the concept of the foreigner is as significant. Like the person who is the strange. I mean, when we talk about, a lot of people would say, I heard it said many times, Britain's, it's a white country, it's the foreigners that have come, and it's not necessarily always about skin colour, as much as it's also about the stranger, the foreigner in our midst, who we don't trust. And they don't belong because they're foreign, and there's a lot of that mixed in with colour.
There is, and it's just about somebody being different, isn't it? What is it about somebody who's different? Now, the children of Israel were in the wilderness for 40 years, and there was one lesson that was being drummed into them for 40 years, which they didn't learn, and they had to be told. It is repeated at least 40 times in the Bible, this one instruction. I gave you the commandment that everybody knows, love your neighbour as yourself. Everybody knows that. But do you know how many times it says in the Hebrew scriptures, what's called the Old Testament, how many times it says, love your neighbour as yourself? I don't give you the answer, I'm not trying to catch you out. Do you know how many times that verse appears in Hebrew scriptures? The answer is once. And everybody knows it. Do you know how many times it says you shall also love the stranger? It's 40 times. Why did it have to be repeated? Why is that the most repeated ethical command in the Bible? Because that's the thing that people found the most difficult to do. So it was repeated 40 times in 40 years. So a racial justice reminder every year. And 4,000 years later, we haven't still learned that lesson. You still have to keep saying to people to love the stranger as yourself also.
You get that question, I'm going to point to people.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yes, Philip.
As a child, when I first started to think about the wider world, I felt that my country, my village even, was the centre of the world.
Yes, yeah.
Everything out there was different and not as good.
Yes.
We were, I don't know whether other people, is that what children think, generally? But I think you used the word deep and depth of feeling several times. And I think, isn't that because, as children, we have this feeling, deep feeling, that we're the centre of the universe, and it just takes decades and may never actually leave us.
Yeah.
So we're born almost with it.
Yeah. And therefore it's a very, it's what we're talking about has to begin at a lot earlier stage, in schools.
Education,
With the youngest. I mean, I have a grandson who's not yet 2. I'm concerned about the world into which he's grown, because all of a sudden, he can't be with other. He loved being with other children until like 6-7 months ago, and now he's become uncomfortable with other children, and it troubles me. And we have to really think now about how we're going to help children to grow up, trusting those who are different from them and being able to relate respectfully to them. So I think the issue you have raised becomes important in a different way today. But this idea that my world is the centre of the empire, I mean, that actually is everywhere. You're right. In all cultures, that people think like that. And the challenge for us is to help people to live on a bigger map, to realise that I am not the same. I am important. Love yourself. You're absolutely critically important. But the way God cares for you is the way God cares for everyone. We need to live on a bigger map. Sorry, Judith. You wanted to say something.
I was arguing that the children think that, but they get that because from the parents and from everybody else.
Yeah, so it's a whole cultural task, isn't it? It's schools and at home that we help children to grow and to live on a bigger map.
Okay, we're taking questions, comments, arguments. Andrew.
A hopeful observation.
Shout.
In some ways, I think things might be improving. About 15 years ago, when I first came to Settle, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, he is the appearance that I am, and she is Indian. They're a mixed-race couple walking through Settle. I was amazed by the looks they got. Absolutely, my jaw dropped to see people following them as they walked through the marketplace. Absolutely incredible. Only 15 years ago. I don't see that now, someone.
Yeah.
I think that has improved.
Because we have more such marriages.
Yes.
And it's important. When I married Kathy, who's from North Yorkshire, in 1986, and there were a lot of difficulties then. People, thought, what's going on here? And then when our children were born, I remember my daughter, when she was about 3, beginning to get into language and understand differences and that. She came home one day and said, somebody called me a half-caste at school. So what does that mean? So I said, okay, you're not half of anything, firstly. You're a full human being. And secondly, you are a doubly blessed human being because your mother and father come from different cultures and we bring different riches, and you're going to live on a bigger map. You will have much to teach others. I said that to this young lady, about 3. A few days later, some of her friends were at our house and they were all sitting in a circle. And one of the young girls was missing, and so somebody said, "Where's Sophie?" And they said, "Oh, Sophie's mum's having a baby, who is a half-caste." And Anjali, my daughter, said, "No, not half-caste, there are no half-castes." And then she explained to them what, and she challenged this child to say, "Not half-caste." And you know what? All of a sudden, the person next to her said, "Oh, well, I'm doubly blessed as well, because my mum is English and my father is Scottish." Somebody next to her said, "Oh, well, I'm doubly blessed as well, because my mum's a Catholic and my father is an Anglican," And all of a sudden, what started off as a negative became a positive. And they all wanted to be doubly blessed in that way. And I loved that. I thought, what a fantastic thing. So, it is about challenging people, and it is about helping them to grow. And I will continue to say that, there are no mixed race, because there's one race, and no half-caste, because, that person is not half a caste and that's another half a caste. I don't know where that concept comes from, this idea of caste, because there's only one caste, only one humanity, the human race.
Questions? Comments? Otherwise I've got another one.
Go on.
This Lawrence Fox was been in the news recently because he said when someone called him white privileged, that he described white privileged and powerful,
Yeah.
that he said that was a racist attitude. I mean, you know, this is. I think people who are white privileged, not necessarily very powerful, but there's sort of a current sense of being threatened by statues being pulled down, and even footballers kneeling before football matches. There's a sort of does the white privileged powerful just shiver a little bit at all of that and feel uncomfortable? And is that uncomfortableness how do we deal with that?
Yeah, yeah. I think that discomfort is good and important. When there's been bad and wrong things, you should feel bad about it. Over the years, I've done a lot of work on anti-racism kind of seminars, and you'd be amazed at how many times in mostly white groups of people that I've worked with, how many of them, when I'm helping them to understand racism, and I said to you I don't believe in racism and why, how many times they've said to me, you're the one who's racist, because you're making us feel like this, you know, you're being racist to us, just what Liam Fox was saying about, you know. And so I think that comment, firstly, that when a black person says to a white person, you're a bit privileged, that's racist. Actually, that's to not understand what racism means in the first place. Because as I said, racism at its most basic, its simplest, is summed up in 3 words. It's a, you know, we mustn't make things too complicated. It's prejudice plus power. We're all prejudiced. So I would say, yes, the person who said that to him is got prejudices, and maybe a prejudice against him. But who holds the power in the world? Where does power reside, generally, in the world? If you look at the way the world is ordered, depending on what is the centre, you know, there was a time when Rome was the centre. They were the centre of the world, the builders of the empire. And so they used their prejudice plus power, whatever that meant. There was a time when China thought they were the centre of the universe. No. And everything circled around them. There was a time when the Turks would have said they're the centre of the universe and all the world centres around them. There was a time when Britain was said to be the centre of the world and everything centred around. Maybe that's America now, is it the USA who said, well, we're the most powerful and the privileged? No. So it shifts, over history it has shifted where power has been. But the way the world is ordered now, power resides with white people, generally. If you think about it, all right, we could have a long discussion on this, but that's where power is. You just look at the world and look at how power is used. And I would say, if you want to talk about racism and use the term racism, and I don't like it, but I think because it exists, and you have to understand what people mean when they say you're being racist. So I think if you want to use that terminology, you must understand what racism means. And be careful who you call a racist. Black people don't hold the power in the world. They don't.
No? Well, no. Questions, or are we all going home?
I think it's quite interesting if you I think there's going to be just a real slight balance on, because what people come up with is, oh, that's woke, that's politically correct.
Yeah.
I can defend to the hill that, no, it's not, it's just wrong, right?
Yeah.
You can go into that argument, but I think that the racist side end up using, if you sort of say, you say the word blackmail or black magic,
Yeah.
and picking on such a sort of small irrelevant thing, and that just opens for argument to actually completely close them down. Whereas if somebody says something, they pick on that and point it out, but don't go too far, too quickly. Over time, maybe the next 200-300 years, we can eliminate that. But if you go too fast, too quickly, you won't bring people along with you.
Yeah.
Because you pick on just about it, and then their big defence
Yeah.
is, oh, that's woke, that's just political correctness.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's just that it's going too fast, too quickly. And I think that's a key point that you have to
You're absolutely
bring
right.
people with you.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, yes.
Because I do think you do see people picking on others away, but
Yeah.
that's just a little bit too picky. And you've lost the argument, you've lost the debate.
Yeah. I know, I refer to Steve Biko and coffee and that, you know, and some people start arguing about calling coffee black or, you know, whatever. You say, come on, there are bigger issues in the world to think about. Don't just focus on these little things, you know, let's look at the bigger issue. And so I think Black Lives Matter was really about saying, let's look at black history and black lives. And I thought, as time went on, what happened to statues and so on, you know, actually took the attention away from the real issue towards what are we going to do with these statues. I think that's an important discussion to have, but it was a bit of a digression. It went away from what the real issue, which is to say, let's look at how black people are treated in the world. That's the issue. Let's not get away from that. That's what needs to be addressed. And the way black people are treated in the world is that, you know, they don't matter. They look at how many black people are killed regularly all around the world, all the time. We don't hear about it. You know, if you've noticed on the news, if there's been some awful tragedy, its kind of seriousness is determined by how many British people were killed on the news. That's how news is determined as to what will be told. So when you look at the news, you know, I think to myself, when I look at the news, you know, if you watch the news later on today, at 10 o'clock, 25 minutes of it will be about COVID-19. You know, it's important, it's very important. But what the heck's going on in other parts of the world? You know, what's happening around the world? We just don't know.
20 people killed on a bridge in Nigeria.
I know, and how much will we hear about what happened in Nigeria? You know, all the big issue.
It's difficult talking about it, racism. You know, it was in church or with your friends, because like you're saying, I mean, you accused of being too politically correct.
Yeah.
We used to do things for One World Week in Satellite about 20, 30 years ago. We wrote things, and it was quite good in the church, raising money for the starving Africans.
Yeah.
But the very few coloured people haven't settled, mostly in the care homes, but we don't make use of them. We could have made good use of the foreigners who hadn't settled, we never did. And it's still too embarrassing to talk about.
Yeah, yeah. But it's important to talk about things, isn't it? And you don't have to have black people in your midst to have the conversation. You know, it's important to have the conversation. Because that story I referred to from Numbers chapter 12, what I like about that is, however you interpret it, God wanted them to talk about it. The way they were using language and how they were being discriminatory, and to say, let's think about this. I like that. God actually said to them, I won't come out. It actually says that you come out, you three, into the tent of the meeting. I want to talk to you about it, and they have a conversation. No, and we need to learn from that, and that's what we should do. Talk about things, and you know, talk about things in a respectful way. There's far too much in the world at the moment about just, if you disagree with somebody, to just denigrate them and be hateful toward them, rather than to just recognize that there are different ways of looking at things. Let's talk about this, and talk respectfully about this, and to recognize that we aren't going to agree, because there are different ways of looking at things, and there are different understandings of history. We need all the components of it, so that and if you listen to everyone, you grow in your understanding, and not deepen your prejudices.
Inderjit, thank you for coming this evening and for speaking to us in the way that you have. And I'm sure that what you said this evening, we're not just going to walk out the door and forget that. We're going to be walking out the door and we'll be pondering on those things. And we'll be going to Numbers chapter, whatever it is.
Well, you've forgotten the number. Number 12. Yeah, how do you do it?
Just 12. Let's show Inderjit how much we appreciate him being here this evening.
It's been a joy to be with you, and honestly, I respect you deeply for thinking about this here in Settle, because you didn't have to. You could have just ignored it, but you did. And that's why I actually said, yeah, I'll come and offer something, because I think it's important for people in places like Settle to think about these issues. It doesn't matter where we live. We are part of the world, and we need to look at how we relate to all the diversity in the world. So thank you for turning out in these difficult days and difficult circumstances. I know it's a risk to go out and to be in a meeting like this, but thank you. And keep talking and keep thinking, and help others out there, to engage in this conversation too. God bless you.
Thank you. So just an announcement about next week. Next week we are addressing the letters L, G, B, T, Q, I, A and the plus